Hello and welcome to the Combined Joint Task Force's DCS Refresher Course video series. This lesson will cover the AJS-37 Viggen and is intended to assist you in getting back up to speed if you haven't flown for a while. As with all our refresher courses, this will not be an in-depth tutorial, but rather a fairly fast-paced review of the aircraft systems and procedures. If you need assistance with a specific topic, check the description to see if it is covered and jump directly to that section. Before I get started, I wanted to point out that I am using the Complete English Cockpit mod by Devrim. So if you are using the default cockpit, this lesson may not be of much help to you and may even cause confusion when trying to locate the corresponding switches and knobs. There are other resources available utilizing the default pit on YouTube, which may be a better option for you. With that being said, let's get started. First, I want to cover how to create a custom data cartridge using the F10 map, as doing so will prevent me from having to do it during the startup procedure and preserve the continuity of flow. Alright, it doesn't matter whether you're using the default cockpit or custom one, the procedure for creating a data cartridge is the same. You're going to drop down a marker, name it B1 through 9 for your navigation waypoints. Although it's a good idea to put one, at least one, over a noticeable terrain feature so you can do nav fixes. To create a target waypoint, you would simply use M instead of B, but make sure that it's in line numerically with the rest of your waypoints. So I've created a B1 and B2, so this will be M3. You can also create BX waypoints, 1 through 9. Your 1 through 5 are going to be for recon or reference points, and your BX 6 through 9 are going to be for the RB15F. So this would be my RB15F search point. You can also make the BX7 for turn point, BX6 for dropping to sea altitude, and the BX9 for detonation of the missile. Although I prefer to make these waypoints using the radar, but we'll cover that later. Once you've created all the points you want on your data cartridge, you will need to make sure that you have a select data cartridge up and down key binding set and know what they are. Then simply open your kneeboard, navigate over to the ground crew settings page, and then at the bottom you'll see data cartridge selected. By default it should be 0, the mission editor. You can cycle through those and you will have a custom cartridge from a Lua file, several auto-generated missions, and then the last one on the list should be the one you just created. Although if you're in a multiplayer you might see data cartridges created by other people. Make sure it has your name, the day's date, as well as the current time. Once you have it selected, you simply need to insert the data cartridge and your plan is there. Take note that when you create the F10 markers for your data cartridge, they are saved in a folder under Saved Games, DCS AJS-37. It's done that way so when you create one, if you go down, you can reload the data cartridge again using the kneeboard without having to create the points again on the F10 map. It's a good idea that once you're done with the mission, you can go in there and delete them out of there just so you don't get confused. But other than that, just check the dates when you're loading them. Alright, now that we've set up our data cartridge and have it selected, we'll go ahead and insert it back here on the back left. Come down, close our canopy, turn on the main power, turn off the warnings, turn on our low pressure fuel or generator, high pressure fuel, turn the starter on, come across, put our HUD slave into off. In the manual it says we're supposed to switch the altitude source to barometric, but I like to leave it on radar. It also says we're supposed to turn the backup and primary altimeters down to 0 for the field run, but I usually worry about that when I'm coming back to land. I'll leave the backup to sea level for reference, especially if I'm doing sea attacks. Over on the primary altimeter, I'll go ahead and set in the QFE for the target destination if I'm doing bombing or something. Come down here, turn on the oxygen. Our external lights are down here on the rear right. Internal lights are over here on the left. You got these rotary knobs here as well as your radar. Come back across. Go ahead and put our knob into Ref Lola. N9099. TO Trek. Now go ahead and load our data cartridge in. Go ahead and hit out mode, current position. When you're taking off, you'll want to make sure that you're in 3 degrees trim over here. Turn our landing and taxi lights on if we need them. Make sure that you come back here, turn on your ejection seat. Make sure we're in nav master mode, and all we have to do after that is make sure to depress the toe brakes to turn off the parking brake, which is this knob here. To put your parking brake on, you'll have to depress your toe brakes and then click that knob to bring it out, and there's your parking brakes back on. And we're all set and ready to take off. We'll go ahead and show the waypoints that we just made earlier. Waypoint 1, waypoint 2, waypoint 3 is our target waypoint, and then we set up a BX8 waypoint, which is out there. So all those that we made on the F10 map have been input. Alright, I'll go ahead and put us back into our landing field by hitting TO Trek, which will put us in LS. Come down here, switch my RWR to visual only. We'll still get the lights around the ring, but not that tone. Then I want to talk about the FR22 radio. Here is the input panel for it, and here is the manual frequency selector. To select a frequency, you just rotate the knobs, select whatever frequency you want, decide whether it's AM or FM, and then you will need to hit this minus button here to make sure that you are broadcasting on the manual frequency. To use the radio itself down here, you will have to reference your knee board, both the radio channels page as well as the air bases page. On the radio channels page, the special 1, 2, and 3 are going to be the 1, 2, and 3. It's not marked, but that's the third one there. The H is your guard, which is this one, and then you have the E, F, and G presets. That's the E, F, and G presets. Down here, this left knob and these lower buttons are going to be for your groups. So on that same radio channels page, you will have aircraft groups that are up. On mine, I have 2 groups up, one on 1-1 and one on 3-1. So if I wanted to speak to the Reaper, I would simply leave the knob on 1 and press the 1 button here. Now I'm talking to the Reaper. If I wanted to talk to the Hornet, I would rotate the knob to 3 and leave the 1 button pressed, and now I'm speaking to the Hornet. Over here you have the air bases selector, and then this row of buttons here chooses what frequency. So referencing the air bases tab, I can see that number 12 is Hatay, which is where I'm at, and underneath that I can see the Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and C2 are the different frequencies. So being on this, I could choose any one of these, the A, B, C, or C2, in order to speak to that runway. Now I wanted to discuss the countermeasure systems of the Viggen. It does not have built-in systems, so if you want to utilize some, you will need to load them on the aircraft. You can have chaff and flare dispensing pods on stations 2 and 6, or you can have a jamming pod on station 6. If you go with the jammer, use the U-22 Alpha, not the U-22, as the Alpha is the newer version. Here we have the jamming pod control panel. Here are the countermeasures and RWR control panel. By default, it's going to start in the 0 off position. If you rotate to Alpha and make sure this right knob is on Foxtrot, it will begin the warm-up procedure, as you can see by the light up here. When this light goes out, it takes about 3 minutes or so. When that light goes out, the pod is warmed up. While we're waiting for that to warm up, I'll go ahead and cover the countermeasures down here. As I said before, this is your RWR control. You can either have it off in visual mode only, which is just show the lights around the radar, or visual and audio. Down here we have our dispenser selector. Speed here on A, if you have it in that's automatic mode. Anytime you have a RWR lock tone, it will automatically dispense your countermeasures. I wouldn't recommend leaving it in that because it could very quickly run your countermeasures out. Your selectors here, 1 through 3, are going to be the speeds. 1 being the fastest, a little slower, a little slower. So if you have it in 3, your dispensers, if you were to just turn it on and leave it on, it would last about 8 minutes. I think this one's about 6 minutes, and this one's like 3 minutes. So I usually leave it in 1, and I just control them and let them out in small bursts. If you have 2 pods on, one on the left and one on the right wing, regardless of what number you have this set to, it will dispense from both pods simultaneously, unless you have it in 3 and 4. If you have it in 4, it will dispense from the left pod first until it is empty, and then it will dispense from the right pod. As I said, I just normally leave mine in 1. And then down here is your selector knob for chaff, chaff and flare, or flare. Depending on which state you have this set to, determines what countermeasures are actually being dispensed. So if you're down dropping bombs and you have no radar contact, you can just leave it in flare to defeat IR missiles. If you've got radar contacts, either aircraft or ground-based, and you think you're going to get a radar SAM launch at you, you can just leave it in chaff. Or if you're not sure what you're going to be running into, you can just leave it in both. Personally, I use the fast countermeasure dispense button. I have it set up on my HOTAS. I press it once to begin, press it again to stop the dispensing. Alright, that covers that. I will come back whenever the jamming pod has been warmed up. Alright, as you can see, the light up here on the caution panel just went out, indicating that the jamming pod is now warmed up. If we left this left knob in alpha and rotated this one to anything other, it would be in listening mode. And it would triangulate any RWR contacts we have that we could use later to find those sources. But I'm not going to cover that. Once the pod is warmed up, go ahead and rotate the left knob to Bravo, and then rotate the right knob all the way around to K. The G through J here are going to be the different frequencies that it can detect and jam at, but the K is automatic. Once you have it in Bravo and Kilo here, you will notice a new light up on the cautions panel. This indicates that the jamming pod is online. Once you begin receiving a RWR contact from the front aspect of the aircraft, it will start blinking, indicating that it is jamming. Alright, now I'm going to hop into the air and demonstrate the functionality in action. Alright, now that we're in the air, I'm going to go ahead and show the chaff by going external. If I hit my fast dispense button, it begins deploying chaff until I hit the button again. It's shooting forward as I have active pods on. Come down here and rotate to chaff and flare. You can see that it's shooting both chaff and flare out. Let me turn this way so yeah, you can see the flares going out as well as the chaff right there. And it will continue until I hit the dispense button again. And then if I come down and select flares only, again we have flares shooting out, but no chaff. You can also set this switch up out here on the outside wall, but I don't use it, I just use the fast dispense. Alright, we can also see that the jamming pod is still active and solid. I'm going to go ahead and turn in on a enemy EWR out here, and we'll see the light begin to flash as it begins to jam. Alright, so now you can see that my RWR ring here is showing the signal I'm receiving, and the jamming pod, now that I'm facing towards it, is flashing, showing that it is actively attempting to jam it. Next, I'll cover waypoint management, particularly how to create and edit waypoints, as well as how to designate and undesignate a waypoint as a target point, and how to establish a primary and alternate landing field. As you can see from down here, waypoint 3 is still our target waypoint. If you go anything above that, 4, 5, 6, the T3, which is the highest waypoint we have, will remain selected. Go ahead and come back down to our LS. I'm going to open the F10 map. As you'll remember from when we created the data cartridge, the waypoint 3, which is our target point, is on these trucks. I'm going to create a new one, a waypoint 4, on this EWR, utilizing the latitude and longitude coordinates here. You can also find the coordinates up here from where your cursor is if you want to do that. I'll begin by moving the selector knob to Ref Lola and go to input mode. Remember, when you're inputting coordinates, they need to be input in longitude, then latitude. That's what the Lola stands for. So my longitude for that target is going to be 363021. Note that when I finish putting in those 6 digits that it rotated back to all zeros. My latitude is 355541. Now that both sets of coordinates have been input, the display will cycle between the coordinates so that you can ensure that you put them in correctly. Now you simply need to choose which waypoint button you want them to be assigned to. If I was to choose 1 through 3, it would overwrite the coordinates that were there. If I choose anything else, it will create a new one. You can also hit your BX or WX button depending on your cockpit, followed by the number that you want it to be. So if I wanted to create a WX1, I'd hit WX and then 1 to create that point. But I'm going to go ahead and hit W4. Note the display goes back to 0. I can go back to out mode and current position. And up here you'll see that we have our target point still on target 3 and a new W4. In order to make the W4 our target waypoint, we'll want to come down to TACT, in, then simply hit 9 and W4. Now up here you can see that W4 has now become T4 for our target. I wanted to show that the waypoint 3 is still our target point. If we wanted to undesignate that, we'd simply need to be in TACT, in, hit 0, then select W3. Now you'll see that our waypoint 3 is no longer a target and it's just a standard waypoint. In order to designate a landing field, so down here you have your L1 for your primary, L2 for your alternate field. Note that both of them are showing about a kilometer away from here, both L1 and L2. To set this up, you will need to reference the knee board again to that airbases page that we covered during the radio. Find the airfield you wish to land at, and then the number that it is, you will need to use that. So for, let's say, Damascus, we would need to go to Rep Lola, then it would be in. For the primary field, you need to use the preset digits of 90. For an alternate, it will be 99. So for Damascus, we will go 9006. So 9006. And then we would hit the landing target button. You can see up here now our L1 field is now about 31 miles from here. Still in the Ref Lola, we'll go ahead and use Hama. So that would be 9911 and then landing target. Go ahead and roll back to current position and out. So you can see the L1 that we set is there, and then our L2 is there. Also take note, when you create and edit a waypoint, you do not have to put in an altitude for that point. It'll automatically be set to 500 meters whenever you create it. I also briefly wanted to touch on QFE. If you are using waypoints and target points that were created either in the mission editor or via the F10 map in the data cartridge before you input it, all the QFE information that you need for those points will be on the kneeboard. If you are creating a waypoint or editing it manually, then you will not have that QFE information in there. You will have to get that yourself. I'm not going to cover how to manually get the QFE by crunching the numbers, as there are several resources out there that do that and they go into depth about it. Personally, I use a QFE web-based calculator that was created by a community member. You can find it or another one with just a quick Google search. The main thing you need from in-game is going to be your QNH, which can be found on the kneeboard at the very top on the first page of the waypoints, and the height of the target area. So here's my target. I can see that the altitude of it is 248. As well up here you can see the altitude of where your cursor is. I have mine in feet, so I need to convert this to meters. So I know 248 feet is roughly 75 meters. I punch that into my QFE calculator, and it comes back that the QFE is 1004.3. So I would simply put in the 1004 with a little bit extra in it, and that would be my QFE for that target. Also, while we're here on the ground, this is your thrust reverser. If you ever need to back up, you can turn it on, throttle up, and you'll start to move backwards. Never, ever hit your brakes when you're going in reverse, otherwise your nose will pop up and your tail will strike the deck. To stop moving backwards, simply throttle down and wait for it to stop, or throttle down, kick your reverser off, and then throttle up a little bit to put in counter thrust to stop your backwards movement. The reverse thruster is also useful on landing if you need to do a short landing or just to help slow yourself down once you've landed. Alright, now that we're in the air, I briefly wanted to discuss the autopilot modes in the Viggen, as they are slightly different from some of the other aircraft. Down here on the dash you have the light indicating that the system's online. You got your attitude and altitude lights. You can activate the autopilot simply by clicking these buttons, or you can set them up on a HOTAS. Alright, note that regardless of the pitch and roll that you have the aircraft in, when you hit the ATT, it will hold that for you. Go ahead and climb just a bit here. Alright, note the altitude reference lines are down a little bit because I'm flying higher. If you set the altitude hold, it will give you a new reference to the current altitude that you're at. Once the autopilot is engaged, you can fly using the trim hat. So I'm going to go trim hat left one time, and it will put me into a left hand level turn. If I wanted to go wings level again, I would simply hit the trim hat right once, and we are now flying level again. You can also change altitude using the trim hat. We're currently at 770. If I go nose up once, that's a quick tap, it'll jump me up about 10 meters, and then it'll level me back out. If you wanted to climb several meters, go ahead and I'm going to hit the trim hat down, tap it a couple times, and then I'll just leave it and it will climb me up, and then slowly level me back out. So you can make fine adjustments to your flight path without having to kick the autopilot off, readjust, and then re-enable the autopilot. Next, I wanted to discuss some of the elements of the radar that will aid you in night navigation, as well as possibly aid you in finding ground targets easier. First, we'll take a look at the controls. For the night navigation, you will need the obstacle detection mode. as well as the radar night filters up and down. To aid you in finding ground targets, you'll need to know the MKR gain, decrease, and increase. Okay, so at nighttime, your radar screen is going to be extremely bright. Even if you turn down the brightness over here, it's still going to be really bright. But with that night filter, you can actually turn the radar red, which should save your eyes and keep you from being blinded trying to use the radar at night. Also, the obstacle avoidance mode. Zoom in down here on the radar a little bit, you'll see we're getting just the standard radar picture from the sweep. But if we hit the obstacle avoidance mode, it will actually bring the radar elevation up to the horizon line right here. So all you're going to see is things that are near your elevation or slightly above it. So this mountain range out here that is right at our elevation, we're seeing that, but we're not seeing anything in the low ground. So this white area here we know is safe. Everything up here, we're going to need to increase our altitude until that goes white so that we don't crash into it. As far as helping you find targets, actually let me zoom back in down here. You can kind of make out some of the vehicles that I have out here in this target range. Over here where this is our waypoint 4 that we made on that EWR. We had that group of vehicles out here. You can barely see those, and if you play with the gain a little bit, you might be able to see some better. Maybe just a little bit. Yeah, there we go. We kind of see them. But if you want to see them really well, you can switch from the logarithmic to the linear mode down here, which is going to darken up your radar big time. You can't really see anything. But then if you use the gain, drop the gain down, now you see those vehicles really well. So if I was wanting to do a bombing run on those vehicles, and I was using the HUD cues to line up on them, they'd be wrong, but I could go ahead, move my waypoint over. Now it's on that group of vehicles, and I could do a bombing run and get a lot of those vehicles. Of course, to come out of that, we'll go back down here to put it in our standard logarithmic mode, and then you'll want to brighten up your gain again so you can actually see normal targets. This isn't something you want to be heads down fiddling with too much when you're in a combat zone, but I just wanted to show it if you happen to need it. Next, we will cover how to do manual nav fixes, as the Viggen's navigation system is prone to drift. Even just taking off from a runway, you'll probably get a little bit of offset on your course as the navigation system starts tracking the moment your landing gear leaves the ground, but it's assuming that you're leaving from the dead center of whatever runway you're taking off from. So if you take off a little bit before or after that, you will already have a little bit of offset, and that can be corrected manually or automatically. Alright, coming down into the pit and ensuring that our selector knob is on current position, you can check the terrain navigation's automatic update here. This 5th digit, you can reference the chart I'm throwing up, will indicate the current status of the terrain navigation, what it's doing. If it's a 1, it's in standby. If it's 2 or 3, it's attempting to locate where it's at. If it's a 4, it has located where it's at, but it's not updating the system. If it's a 5, then it's located where it's at and it's currently updating the navigation system. This last digit here indicates how much drift that the system thinks that it has acquired. If you have a 0 here, it doesn't mean that you don't have any drift, but it's less than a kilometer. If it's anything over that, that's about how many kilometers the system thinks that it's offset. In order for the terrain navigation system to function effectively, you need to be flying over varied terrain. So if you're flying over the ocean or over a large section of flat terrain, the navigation system won't be able to figure out where you're at. But if you're flying over small hills or valleys, things like that, where the navigation system can use its radar altimeter to triangulate where you're supposed to be and where you really are, then it will update. But if it's not updating, then you will have to do a manual fix. So when we were making our data cartridge earlier, I said it's always a good idea to make at least one of your points over a noticeable terrain feature so you can do a nav fix. I put my waypoint 2 here on this little bitty waterway, and I currently have it selected. You can see from our angle that that waypoint should be off to our left, but as you can see, waypoint 2 is off to our right, so I know I've got some drift over here. To update that, we can do a visual fix, which is just over flying where we know the waypoint to be and hitting our T1 TV fix buttons, though we need to make sure the radar is off. Or you can use the radar to do the navigation update. But as you can see, the current angle we're at, we're not able to see where the actual end of that waterway is due to the mountain being higher on that side. In order to see that, we would have to come from this direction over here. But coming from this way, we're just going to go ahead and do a visual fix, and then we will update it with the radar coming from the other direction. Okay, so to do a visual fix, we simply need to just fly towards the waypoint. Make sure our radar is off. Just past these trees in here, I can see where the end of the waterway is, lining up on it. Then I simply need to just overfly it. As I'm getting close, I'll go T1. Then when I think I'm above it, I went ahead and hit TV fix. You'll note that my waypoint automatically jumped to waypoint 3. We'll go ahead and bring it back to waypoint 2. I'm going to stretch out a bit and come back from this direction over here so we can see it clearly in the radar. Alright, we are back inbound towards our waypoint 2. I'm just going to check down here. You can see the inlet. But I can go ahead and fine tune it just a little bit if I want to. And now it's over that waterway again. Alright, keep in mind that if you are doing a nav fix, you need to have a waypoint selected, as having a target point or a BX point selected will simply move that point independently of the actual navigation system. Alright, now we will cover weapon employment, and we'll begin with the Mark 71 general purpose bomb. Normally I don't cover unguided munitions, but seeing that the Viggen only has these type of bombs, I'll go ahead and cover them. As you can see from the chart that I've thrown up, there's several delivery modes. You have level release modes with the plan, 2 different dive bomb modes, as well as 2 different radar release modes, including nav toss mode. The ones I'm going to be covering are the CCIP level release using high drag bombs, as well as a pop-up dive attack with low drag bombs. Alright, from the knee board, I know that my QFE at my target 3 here is going to be 1004.3. I went ahead and input that. Over on the side panel, I know from that chart that for a CCIP mode, I need to put the bomb mode into plan. I went ahead and I'm going to leave my intervals for my bombs at 10. I'll come out of this. As I make my run up, I need to ensure that I'm still in nav mode. My HUD glass is down. My speed is roughly 8.9 Mach, and I'm at an altitude of between 125 to 250. That's about where I like to run it at. I'll go ahead and cut back when I'm inbound on the target. Alright, I'm running in on the target now. I'm at about 170, 180. Going 8.4. Less than 5 kilometers out. I'm gonna go trigger unsafe. I can see my targets. I just need to put them between the circle and the dot down on the bottom of the HUD glass. Press and hold. Weapons are away. As you can see out there, bombs on target. And that's all it is for a CCIP level release with high drag bombs. Now we'll move on to low drag bombs with a dive attack and a pop-up. Alright, first I'm going to cover how to create a pop-up point for a target. To do so, first we need to go to the F10 map. Here's our target that we're going to be engaging. I know that my waypoint 2 is over here. This is going to be my waypoint 3. Keep that in mind when you're creating a pop-up point, because it wouldn't do well to put your pop-up point here, because you'd be coming this way and then have to make almost a 180-degree turn to get back on target. So instead I'm going to do slightly off 90, so I'll go from here, and I want to be somewhere out over here. But we need the bearing from our pop-up point to my target, so from over here I'll go ahead and spin it back around and come this way to my target. And I can see that 120 is going to be my bearing from my pop-up point. Now I have my distance set to nautical miles, though we need kilometers for the input. So if I wanted this exact distance, I would have to convert that into kilometers, but I'm going to go ahead and put just 4 kilometers as where I want my pop-up point to be out here on a bearing of 120. Alright, to create the pop-up point, we'll begin by rotating our selector knob to tact, go to N, and then we'll put in the bearing first of 120. And then for my kilometers, I want it to be 4 kilometers away. That is a bit close, but just for demonstration, we'll go 040. This last 0 here is if I was going to be doing like 4.6 kilometers. That 0.6 would be just 46. Alright, and then from there, we need to select our waypoint 3, which is our target point. The display will go back 0, and then we can rotate back to current position and out. To check, you can see right now that P3 is currently selected. Make sure that if you click your waypoint here, you'll see P3 and T3. Make sure that T3 is not showing. It needs to be P3 before you select off of it. And I'm going to go ahead and go to waypoint 2. We'll fly past waypoint 2, and then the P3 will pop up. Note that down here on the ring, this bracket here will still point towards the T3, not to the pop-up point. We will need to fly off the HUD symbology to go to our pop-up point. Also, you need to make sure that your master mode down here is in nav until you pass the pop-up point. Otherwise, the HUD symbology will not switch to your target point. So we need to fly till nav mode until we pass the pop-up point and then rotate to the attack position. I have mine set up on a HOTAS so I can do it really quickly. While in the air, you may wish to do so too. Otherwise, you'll have to look down real quick and flip that. Or if you put it into the attack position before you hit your pop-up point, you'll just have to know roughly the area where your target is. Also, for our dive bombing, I'll go ahead and come down here. We need to be in the dive mode, so I'll go ahead and rotate the knob once. I want my bombs to be in a 10-meter interval. Come out of that, put my HUD glass down, and we just need to fly past waypoint 2 here and then to the pop-up point. I'll go ahead and get back when we're inbound. Alright, we are coming up on waypoint 2. As we pass it, note that it will switch to the P3. Now I'm flying directly at my P3, and note the ring down below is still pointed at off to the front right, which is where the targets are. I've left them marked out there so you can just see for reference. Go ahead and turn that reference off. Alright, now you see the distance line at the bottom. That's indicating I'm coming up on my pop-up point. As I get close, I'll go ahead and begin to pull up. It switched. I went ahead, went A and F. Switch safe off. Coming around to my target. And release, pull up. And right on target. And that is all it is for a pop-up point. Again, you may want to make sure that your pop-up point is a little bit further back than mine was. I was pretty close, but I knew exactly where the targets were out in the open. Next, we'll cover the VK90 cluster munition. I've already got my waypoint set up as my target point, the QFE in, although I'm going to be releasing the weapon in the radar altimeter mode. That way the QFE doesn't really matter much. Come over and set up the weapons by rotating this knob to attack. With the toggle switches here, this one's set to series. You will release ordnance as long as you keep the weapon release button held with a 1.5 second interval between each release. With single, you will only release one at a time. With select, you will drop the ordnance with the custom cruise altitude, which I'll cover in a minute. With the STD or standard, it will use the default 60-meter cruise altitude. The weapon can be released in nav, attack, or recon mode. We'll go ahead and come down here. If we rotate this down to tact, go to input, you can set up a custom cruise altitude for the ordnance. It has its own radar altimeter in it, and it'll try to maintain that. That is done by using the prefix 91 followed by the altitude between 30 and 500 meters. So if we wanted to go 30, we would go 030. The last digit is not used, and then enter that. Or if we wanted 500, we would simply 915000, and that would be 500. Although even though I've put those in, we will not be using those because I have it in the standard mode. Also, while in this mode, referencing this chart, we can choose how we want the weapons to impact. If we're firing more than one, it'll be long, wide, or compact area. I'm going to use compact area because our vehicles are nice and tight. So it's going to be 923000. Enter. Go ahead and rotate back around to current position. On our approach, we need to be flying between 50 and 500 meters above ground level, going between 0.6 and 0.9 Mach. Then we'll just simply use the HUD symbology to release the weapons. I'll go ahead and come back when I'm running in. Alright, now that we are inbound on the target, We're going to be watching this horizontal bar here until it moves in and it was within the 2 outer vertical bars, making sure our speed is above 0.6. See, the bar has gone solid, getting ready to release. Press and hold, 1, 2, releasing, weapon release button. Coming off target. Alright, looks like they're drifting a bit with the wind. I probably should have went with a wide area impact as opposed to a compact, but that's how you employ the BK-90s. Also note that I still have 2 BK-90s on my rails as I only held down the weapon release button long enough for 2 to come off. I could switch to a new attack point and attack somewhere else or re-attack this location. Next, I briefly wanted to touch on the RB-05 Alpha. I'm not going to be employing the weapon as I think it's inferior when compared to the RB-75, as the time it takes you to visually acquire the target ahead of you, launch the missile, and guide it onto target, you can locate and launch on up to 4 targets with the RB-75 and be outbound. But I did want to cover the setup in case anyone wants to use it. Down here you have the RB-05 line, so if you're engaging sea targets, ground targets, or air-to-air targets, you would choose accordingly. If you're engaging air-to-air targets, you can also select a wingspan, which will help give you some HUD symbology up here. To fire the RB-05 at ground or sea target, simply come to the attack mode, locate your target, weapon unsafe, fire, and you will have a red flare on the end of the missile, and simply just use the RB-05 steer hat that you have to set up in the HOTAS and just guide it onto target. But again, the RB-75, I believe, in my opinion, is far superior, so we're going to go ahead and move on and cover that now. So for the RB-75, all you need to do is simply rotate your knob to the RB-75, locate your general target area, go to ATK mode, which will bring up your sight over here for the currently selected missile. You will have to go T1 to allow you to slew the missile using the radar slew stick. Then when you've located a target or roughly near the target, hit the TV fix, which will lock the missile to it. You will go trigger unsafe, fire, and then you'll have to go trigger safe before it will select the next missile. And then the same process, T1, slew, TV fix to lock, trigger unsafe, fire, trigger safe to switch to the next missile. As you can see, I've got those targets out here on the range. When we go to the attack mode here, we will have a small circle above it, which is our current target waypoint. And then we'll aim roughly at the target circle, slew down until we find our targets, lock and fire. I'll go ahead and come back when I've turned in. Alright, I'm inbound. Note that whenever I switch to attack mode, the radar goes off and the sight comes on. To change the contrast, use A0 for black on white, A1 for white on black, and A2 is automatic. Go ahead and bring my nose down. Note that I left the targets on down there so you can see in relation to the actual steer point. Now I set myself in ATT, and then I'll go up to my sight up here. Go ahead and hit T1, come down, and I can see the targets. Go ahead and lock, unsafe, fire, trigger safe. Come back down, lock, trigger unsafe, fire, safe. You can use T0 to bore sight the missile if it automatically locks on. Trigger unsafe, fire, trigger safe. See how it's still locked, going to go T0, come down again, find a different target, lock, unsafe, fire, and I'm outbound. Next, I'm going to cover the RB-04E anti-ship missile. Out of the 2 anti-ship missiles the Viggen can carry, this is the older and more basic of the 2. To set it up, we'll go ahead and rotate to attack. Over here we have single and series release. I want to put it in series so I can release both with one single press and hold of the weapon release button with a small interval between them. Over here we have group and single target selectors. I know our ship group has 4 targets, so I'm going to leave it in group. We can release the weapons from either attack or nav mode. Go ahead and move to attack. There is not a waypoint currently over the targets. I know they're out here off our left wing. I'm going to set this up to simulate how you would attack targets if you were just on a patrol and located enemy ships, or if you had friendly report of enemy surface vessels. I'm going to come down here and select WX and then 1 to select a WX1 point, but note that I do not actually have one set yet. So I'm going to turn my radar on. unpause, look down here on my radar and I can see those targets. Go T1, move my radar stick up over the targets, TV to fix the target. Now these weapons need to be released at an altitude between 50 to 425 meters. So I'm going to drop down. You can see I've started to get the release Q symbology up here. When this horizontal bar gets within the two outside vertical bars, we are within the release envelope. Go ahead and set my altitude hold autopilot and just cruise towards the targets. Already in attack mode, I'm going to go ahead and weapon unsafe. We are now within the two outer vertical bars, so I'm going to press and hold. When my red release light comes on the dash, I know that both weapons are away and I can evade. Alright, next I'll discuss the RB-15F, which is a far superior missile to the RB-04, which the RB-04 only has about a 24 kilometer and is a direct attack missile. The RB-15F has about a 70 kilometer distance and it can utilize advanced BX waypoints. During the data cartridge creation portion of the video, I showed how to create these waypoints. Now I just wanted to give a quick demonstration of why you would create those points in the data cartridge and how they function. So if you knew that your targets were going to be static, that's the time when you would set them up in the data cartridge. If they're not going to be moving around, you probably want to make them manually, which I'll show here in a second. But in this scenario right here, we have 4 ships that are anchored in a harbor. And using the data cartridge setup, we could set up points like this. And for this reason, we could use the mountain for terrain masking, come up to this valley here, release the missiles somewhere in here, and they would fly towards the BX7 waypoint, maintaining their release altitude, and fly right over the city. Once they get over the city and they've reached the distance that matches between the BX6 and 7, they will drop to sea altitude. Note that the BX6 is not a steer point. They will fly directly to the BX7. It's only this distance that matters. So once they reach that distance, they will drop down to sea altitude, hit BX7, turn, fly towards the BX8 waypoint, where they will begin to search for targets. If they do not find targets, they will fly beyond it, and once they've covered this much distance between the BX8 and BX9 waypoint, they will self-destruct. So even if they come in and they catch a bit of a target and they start to turn and then they lose it and they just continue flying, they will still self-destruct before they get back into the city. Alright, next I'll demonstrate how to create those BX waypoints on the fly using the radar. Note that while my English cockpit does have WX, I'm going to continue to refer to it as BX just to keep it on the same level with what you have to do on the F10 map. So first we'll need to turn on the radar and find our ships, which I know are directly out ahead of us. Yeah, we can see them right there. That's our ship group right there. Come across, we'll hit the BX8. Note that we do not have a BX8 out here. I'll go ahead and hit T1, slew over, and TV lock that area, because I can adjust just a bit better. Now note that when you create your BX8 waypoint, the BX6, 7, and 9 are all automatically created. So go ahead and BX7, that's where it's going to be. I'll go ahead and T1, move that up a bit to over here. Then we can show the BX6 waypoint, which is the distance from the BX7 that it'll drop to sea level, as well as the BX9 waypoint, which is the distance past the BX8, which is here, that the missile will self-destruct at. Now I'll go ahead and come back down and select my BX7 and leave it selected. I'll show you why here in a minute. And we'll go ahead and set up the weapons for use. Coming across, we'll set the knob to attack. I want to put my selector into single, as I'm going to drop one missile on one BX7 waypoint, and then I'm going to adjust the BX7 waypoint and drop another one. Over here, this toggle, if you leave it on standard, it will use the default search mode. If you leave it in select, you can set up a custom search pattern for it, which, referencing the chart that I'm throwing up now, go ahead and come down here, move to TACT, input 80003 for the convoy attack group target large search area, and then hit the TO Trek, which is now input that. Come back to current position, come to the attack mode, And you'll notice down here on the radar that now that I'm in attack mode, I have the BX8 waypoint showing over the ships, and my BX7 waypoint is across. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch on this BX7 waypoint, and then I'll go T1, slew it over here, TV fix, and then launch on the second BX7 waypoint. This will allow my missiles to split. So one missile will hit this, turn, go to the target. The other one will hit over here, hit the BX7, turn, and go to the target, approaching from two different directions, splitting the ship's countermeasures. Release altitude is going to be between 50 and 2,000 meters. Alright, note that I'm flying towards the target. I have weapon unsafe. I have the release cue showing that it is within the release envelope. Over here is my BX7 waypoint, but if you look, I'm actually flying towards my BX8 right now. I'll go ahead and press and hold the weapon release. The rock tells me that it is away. I'll go ahead and T1, slew over my BX7, TV fix. Go ahead and release my second one. By the red release light down here, I can tell that both are away. Go weapon safe, come off target. Actually see one missile here, the one that I fired to the right there, and the one left going there. Especially if the ships are in open water and not near land, you can actually have it to where the missiles come at it from completely opposite direction by setting your BX7 waypoints out here on the side. So even if you're flying directly at it from this way, the missiles will go out, hit, turn, and come back from the sides. Alright, next I wanted to cover air-to-air weapon employment, as the Viggen is capable of carrying the RB-24, which is an older rear aspect sidewinder. It is the only air weapon that can be carried on the two outermost wing stations. It's also capable of carrying the RB-74, which is a newer all-aspect missile, and it can only be carried on the 4 inside station. Note that if you're carrying both at the same time, it will use the outer wingtip stations first, and then the inner pylons. The usage for both is the same. You can either rotate the knob to IR-RB, or you can use your IR missile fast select, which is this button here. And you also should set up an IR missile uncage. And you can also set a wingspan from here. Alright, we're going to use our radar. I'm going to set it to A2 for the B-scope to try to lock onto one of our air targets using T1, and that will give us ranging data on the HUD to let us know when we're within the Sidewinder's maximum launch distance. Use the IR missile fast select. When you uncage, you'll see that small circle and it will begin to search. If you lock onto a target that's moving fast, you should uncage. That way the IR seeker can attempt to keep it in view as long as it's in front of you. I'm going to go ahead and press T1 to try to get ranging data off the radar. Alright, there we go. We have a lock on that target in front of us. Got tone. We'll go ahead and uncage. Weapon unsafe. Fire. It's defeating. Fire again. And splash. That concludes this refresher course for the AJS-37 Viggen. Thank you for your time and attention.